The small bank on Maple Street was alive with the usual hum of activity that came with a typical weekday morning. Sunlight streamed through the large glass windows, casting warm golden beams across the polished marble floor. Customers shuffled, in and out, some clutching checkbooks, others holding deposit slips or withdrawal forms. The air smelled faintly of fresh coffee from the cafe next door, mingling with the crisp scent of paper and ink. It was an ordinary scene, until it wasn't. Among the crowd stood Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, a frail yet dignified woman in her late 70s. She wore a faded floral dress, sensible shoes, and a cardigan that had seen better days but still carried the pride of someone who took care in their appearance. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and her glasses hung loosely around her neck, held by a beaded chain. In one hand she clutched a worn leather purse, its edges scuffed from years of use. Inside, tucked carefully beneath receipts and old photographs, was a modest pension check, a lifeline she relied on each month. Eleanor had been coming to this bank for decades. Long before smartphones and online banking existed, she'd walked. These same halls greeted familiar faces and exchanged pleasantries with the tellers. Back then, things felt personal. People remembered your name. They asked about your grandchildren or how your garden was doing. But lately something had shifted. The staff seemed rushed, disconnected, almost robotic. Transactions were processed quickly, but smiles were rare, and conversations even rarer. Still, Eleanor persisted. This was her routine, her way of staying, connected to the world outside her quiet little home. Today, however, the line moved slower than usual. A group of college students chatted loudly near the entrance, scrolling through their phones while ignoring the queue. An older man argued with a teller over a bounced check, his voice rising above the din. Eleanor waited patiently, shifting her weight from one foot to the other as arthritis nagged at her knees. She tried not to let the noise bother her, instead, focusing on the rhythmic ticking of the clock mounted high on the wall. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Each second stretched just a little longer than the last. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it was her turn. She approached the counter, offering a polite smile to the young teller seated behind the glass partition. He couldn't have been more than 25, dressed in a crisp uniform shirt with a name tag that read, Jake. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to input whatever information she provided. Good morning, Eleanor began softly, placing her check on the counter. I'm here to deposit this, please. Jake glanced down at the slip of paper, then frowned. Do you have the deposit slip filled out? He asked. His tone clipped. Eleanor blinked, momentarily confused. Oh dear, I thought I didn't need one anymore. Someone told me over the phone, you should have brought it. Jake interrupted, his impatience bubbling to the surface. We can't process anything without the proper paperwork. A flush crept up Eleanor's neck as she fumbled through, her purse searching for the elusive deposit slip. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying both her age and her growing discomfort. Behind her, the line grew restless. Someone sighed audibly. Another muttered under their breath, Come on, hurry up. Eleanor's cheeks burned hotter. She hated feeling like a burden, especially when all she wanted was to complete a simple task. I'm sorry, she stammered, trying to keep her voice steady. I'll find it, I promise. But Jake wasn't listening anymore. Instead, he called over the manager, a tall man with slicked back hair and a perpetually smug expression. Mr. Harris strode over, exuding an air of superiority that made Eleanor shrink further into herself. Without so much as a glance at her, he addressed the room, his voice carrying far enough for everyone to hear. It's unfortunate, he announced, shaking his head theatrically, that some people still don't understand how modern banking works. We're happy to help, of course, but we do expect our customers to follow basic procedures. The words hit Eleanor like a slap. She stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing as if to protest. But no sound came out. The room fell silent save for the soft whirring of the ceiling fans overhead. Other customers shifted awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. No one dared to speak up, not even the elderly gentleman who had once shared stories with Eleanor during previous visits. It was as though the entire room had collectively decided to look away, leaving her alone in her shame. Tears pricked at the corners of Eleanor's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she gripped her purse tighter, willing herself to stay composed. Just as she considered walking away entirely, the glass doors of the bank swung open with a gentle whoosh. A figure stepped inside, silhouetted briefly against the bright sunlight streaming in from outside. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The figure standing in the doorway was unmistakable. Tall, with an easygoing charm that radiated even before he spoke, Keanu Reeves entered the bank as if stepping onto a movie set. But this wasn't Hollywood. This was real life, and his presence immediately transformed the atmosphere. Dressed casually in faded jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and a well-worn leather jacket, he looked every bit like the down-to-earth star fans adored. His dark sunglasses rested atop his head, pushing back thick strands of jet-black hair. He carried no entourage, no cameras, just himself, and yet the room seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, no one moved. The customers stopped fidgeting. The tellers paused mid-transaction. Even Mr. Harris, the smug manager who had humiliated Eleanor moments earlier, froze mid-sentence, his mouth slightly agape. It was as though reality itself had taken a sharp turn, leaving everyone struggling to catch up. Keanu glanced around, taking in the scene with quiet curiosity. His eyes landed on Eleanor first, her trembling hands, her flushed cheeks, the way she clutched her purse like a lifeline. Something in her posture told him everything he needed to know. This woman was hurt, embarrassed, and alone. Then his gaze shifted to the staff behind the counter, their tense expressions, the awkward shuffle of papers, the palpable discomfort hanging over them like a storm cloud. And finally, he noticed the other customers, their faces a mix of shock, guilt, and disbelief at the unexpected celebrity now standing among them. Without hesitation, Keanu took a step forward, his movements deliberate but unhurried. There was no grand entrance, no dramatic flourish, just the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly what to do. As he approached the counter, the sound of his boots against the marble floor echoed softly, breaking the silence that had settled over the room. Every eye followed him, watching as he stopped beside Eleanor and turned to face the manager. "Is there a problem here?" Keanu asked, his voice smooth and steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. The question was simple, almost casual, but it carried weight. It wasn't accusatory, nor was it angry. It was firm, direct, and impossible to ignore. For a man known for playing larger-than-life heroes on screen, his tone in that moment felt eerily similar, as though he'd stepped straight out of one of his films to confront injustice in real life. Mr. Harris blinked rapidly, clearly caught off guard. Of all the people who could have walked into the bank at that exact moment, this was not someone he'd anticipated dealing with. No, sir," he stammered, trying to regain his composure. "Everything's fine. Just resolving a minor issue." "A minor issue?" Keanu repeated, raising an eyebrow. He gestured subtly toward Eleanor, who still stood frozen, beside him, clutching her purse tightly. "Because it doesn't look fine to me. In fact, it looks like this lovely lady has been treated pretty poorly." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Mr. Harris opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Instead, he glanced nervously at the other employees, hoping for some kind of support, or maybe a distraction, but they were equally speechless. Even Jake, the young teller who had snapped at Eleanor earlier, looked away, his face reddening under Keanu's unwavering gaze. Deciding to take control of the situation, Keanu turned his attention to Eleanor. With a warm smile, he extended his hand. "Hi there," he said gently. "I'm Keanu. May I help you?" Eleanor hesitated, unsure whether this was really happening or if stress had finally caused her imagination to run wild. But when Keanu's hand remained outstretched, steady and sincere, she reached out tentatively to shake it. I'm Eleanor," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "But how did you—" "No need to explain," Keanu interrupted kindly, cutting her off before she could spiral into self-doubt. "Let's focus on getting this sorted out, okay? You shouldn't have to deal with any of this." His words were simple, but they carried a profound impact. For the first time since entering the bank, Eleanor felt seen, not as a nuisance or an inconvenience, but as a person worthy of respect and care. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but this time, they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite name. Turning back to the manager, Keanu crossed his arms loosely over his chest, his demeanor calm, but commanding. "So, here's what we're going to do," he began, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You're going to assist Mrs. Eleanor properly. No more excuses, no more delays. And while we're at it, maybe we can talk about why treating customers with kindness isn't optional. It's essential." Mr. Harris swallowed hard, visibly sweating under the pressure. "Of course, Mr. Reeves," he said quickly, nodding so vigorously it seemed like his head might pop off. "We'll make sure everything is handled promptly." But Keanu wasn't satisfied with empty promises. "Good," he replied, his voice softening slightly, "because I'd hate to think anyone else might walk out of here feeling the way Mrs. Eleanor does right now." As the manager scrambled to comply, the rest of the room remained transfixed. Some customers exchanged wide-eyed glances, whispering excitedly about the surreal turn of events. Others simply stared, unable to process what they were witnessing. One woman pulled out her phone, snapping a discreet photo of Keanu as he leaned over the counter to guide Eleanor through the transaction. Another man gave a low whistle, muttering, "Man, this guy's cooler than his movies." Meanwhile, Keanu focused entirely on Eleanor, speaking softly as he helped her locate the correct paperwork. "Here, let me see that," he offered, reaching for her purse when she struggled to unzip it. "Ah, there it is. See? All better already." His humor eased the tension, coaxing a small laugh from Eleanor despite her nerves. By the time the deposit slip was filled out and handed to the teller, the mood in the bank had shifted completely. What had started as a humiliating ordeal for Eleanor had become something else entirely, a moment of humanity, dignity, and connection. And at the center of it all stood Keanu Reeves, proving once again that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism happen far away from the silver screen. With the deposit slip finally in hand, Keanu turned his full attention to the task at hand. But he didn't just hand it over to the teller and walk away. He stayed by Eleanor's side, ensuring that every step of the process was handled with care. His presence alone seemed to transform the entire dynamic of the room. The staff, who moments earlier had been dismissive and impatient, now scrambled to assist him, their movements hurried yet cautious, as if afraid to make even the slightest misstep. Jake, the young teller who had initially snapped at Eleanor, now found himself staring down at the counter, avoiding eye contact. He fumbled nervously with the papers, his hands shaking slightly as he processed the transaction. Beside him, another employee whispered urgently, "Is that really Keanu Reeves?" Jake nodded stiffly, too overwhelmed to respond. It wasn't. Every day that a Hollywood star walked into your workplace, and certainly not one known for being so genuinely kind. Keanu leaned casually against the counter, his demeanor calm but commanding. He glanced at Eleanor, offering her a reassuring smile. "Almost done," he said softly, his voice carrying just enough warmth to put her at ease. Then, turning back to Jake, he added, "Take your time. We're not in a rush." The comment was simple, but it carried layers of meaning. To Jake, it felt like both permission and a gentle reminder. This wasn't about speed. It was about getting things right. For Eleanor, it was validation, proof that her needs mattered, that she deserved patience and respect. And for everyone else in the room, it served as a quiet lesson in how to treat others with dignity. As the transaction progressed, Keanu kept the conversation light, cracking small jokes to ease the tension. "You know," he said with a playful grin, addressing Eleanor, "if I had $1 for every time someone forgot a deposit slip, I'd probably own this bank by now." Eleanor chuckled softly, the sound barely audible but genuine. "Well, maybe you should start charging them," she replied, surprising herself with her own boldness. Her voice still wavered, but there was a newfound spark in her eyes. a glimmer of confidence slowly returning. Keanu laughed warmly, clearly delighted by her response. See? Now that's the spirit. Next thing you know, we'll have you running the place. His humor worked its magic, melting away the last remnants of embarrassment that had clung to Eleanor since she first stepped up to the counter. She began to relax, her shoulders loosening, her grip on her purse easing ever so slightly. For the first time that morning, she felt like she belonged, not as an inconvenience but as a valued customer. Meanwhile, Mr. Harris hovered nearby, hovering awkwardly between wanting to intervene and fearing further scrutiny from Keanu. Every few seconds he would glance toward the actor, gauging his expression, searching for some sign of approval or disapproval. When Keanu finally turned to address him directly, the manager nearly jumped out of his skin. "Hey, Mr. Harris, is it?" Keanu asked, his tone polite but firm. "Mind if I ask you something?" Mr. Harris nodded quickly, his atoms apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. Anything." Keanu tilted his head slightly, studying the man with an intensity that made him squirm. "What's the policy here when someone comes in without all the paperwork they need? Do you always handle it this way?" The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. Mr. Harris hesitated, clearly caught off guard. He glanced around the room, as if hoping someone might swoop in to save him, but no one moved. Finally, he cleared his throat and mumbled, "Well, we try to accommodate our customers as best we can, but sometimes procedures must be followed." "Procedures," Keanu repeated slowly, letting the word linger. He crossed his arms loosely, over his chest, his gaze unwavering. "So, what you're saying is, if someone doesn't have the exact piece of paper they need, you make them feel bad about it?" Mr. Harris blinked rapidly, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. No, that's not what I meant, because that's sure what it looked like to me," Keanu interrupted, his voice sharpening ever so slightly. "And I think it's safe to say it's what it felt like to Mrs. Eleanor here." He gestured toward her, his gesture protective, almost possessive. "Look, I get it, rules are important, but so is kindness. You work in customer service, right? That means your job isn't just to process transactions, it's to make people feel valued. If you can't do that, then what's the point?" The words hit like a punch, each one landing with precision. Mr. Harris opened and closed his mouth several times, struggling to form a coherent response. Around the room, other employees exchanged uneasy glances, some nodding subtly in agreement, others looking down at their shoes in shame. Keanu didn't wait for a reply. Instead, he turned his focus back to Eleanor, guiding her through the final steps of the transaction. "All right, let's wrap this up," he said brightly, his tone shifting effortlessly back to warmth and encouragement. "Just a couple more signatures, and we'll be good to go." As Eleanor signed the forms, Keanu chatted with her about mundane topics, the weather, her garden, the cafe next door where she liked to grab coffee on Saturdays. It was remarkable how quickly the mood shifted under his influence. By the time the transaction was complete, Eleanor was smiling again, her earlier humiliation replaced by gratitude and relief. "There we go," Keanu announced triumphantly, handing her the receipt. "All set. Mission accomplished." Eleanor took the slip of paper, clutching it tightly as though it were a treasure. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know what to say. You didn't have to do all this." Keanu shrugged modestly, brushing off her thanks with a wave of his hand. "Of course I did. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect. Besides," he added with a wink, "it's nice to meet someone who appreciates good manners these days." His words drew a ripple of laughter from the crowd, breaking the tension completely. Several customers clapped softly, their applause hesitant at first but growing louder as others joined in. Even the staff couldn't help but crack smiles, though they remained visibly shaken by the events of the past few minutes. As Keanu stepped back from the counter, the room buzzed with energy. What had started as a tense, uncomfortable scene had transformed into something extraordinary, a moment of connection, compassion, and humanity. And while the transaction itself may have been routine, the impact of Keanu's actions would linger long after he left the building. Once Eleanor's transaction was complete and she had tucked her receipt safely into her purse, Keanu didn't simply walk away. Instead, he turned his attention to the staff, his demeanor shifting subtly but noticeably. The warmth and humor that had eased Eleanor's nerves were still present, but now there was a seriousness in his eyes, a quiet determination to ensure that what had happened wouldn't be brushed aside as a one-time incident. He wasn't just here to fix a problem, he was here to make a point. "All right," Keanu said, clapping his hands together softly, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. His voice carried effortlessly, commanding respect without raising its volume. "Now that we've taken care of Mrs. Eleanor, let's talk about how things went down today." The employees exchanged nervous glances, their earlier discomfort returning in full force. Jake, the young teller who had snapped at Eleanor, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Mr. Harris, the manager, stood frozen in place, his face pale and sweaty. Even those who hadn't been directly involved in the interaction shifted uncomfortably, sensing that what was coming next wasn't going to be pleasant for anyone wearing a uniform. Keanu gestured toward a corner of the bank where a small seating area was set up, surrounded by potted plants and glossy brochures advertising loans and savings accounts. "Let's gather over here for a minute," he suggested, his tone calm but firm. "Just a quick chat, nothing formal." No one dared argue. One by one, the staff filed over, some dragging their feet, others moving with robotic precision. A key. Few customers lingered nearby, pretending to browse through pamphlets while secretly eavesdropping on what was about to unfold. The air buzzed with anticipation. This wasn't something you saw every day. Once everyone was gathered, Keanu took a seat on one of the chairs, leaning forward slightly with his elbows resting on his knees. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, but there was an undeniable intensity in his gaze. He scanned the group slowly, making eye contact with each person before speaking. "I'm not here to lecture anybody," he began, his voice soft but steady, "but I do want to share something important. You all work in customer service, that's a big deal. People come to you because they need help. They trust you to guide them, to listen to their concerns, and to treat them with respect. That's your job. And it's not always easy. I get that. Sometimes people forget paperwork or they ask questions you've answered 100 times already. Or maybe they're having a bad day and take it out on you. But here's the thing. None of that gives anyone permission to make someone feel small." He paused, letting his words sink in. Around him, the employees sat silently, their expressions ranging from shame to curiosity. Some nodded almost imperceptibly, while others stared at the ground, unable to meet his eyes. Keanu continued, his tone gentle but unyielding. "Mrs. Eleanor didn't deserve to be humiliated. She came in here trying to do something simple, something she's done countless times before, and instead of helping her, she was made to feel like a burden, like she was wasting everyone's time. Does that sound fair?" No one answered. The silence stretched for several seconds, heavy and loaded, until Keanu broke it himself. "What if it was your grandmother?" he asked suddenly, his question sharp and pointed. "What if it was someone you love standing at that counter, feeling scared and embarrassed because no one would take the time to explain things properly? How would you feel then?" The impact of his words rippled through the group. Several employees shifted uncomfortably, their faces reddening as they imagined the scenario. One woman, a middle-aged teller with glasses perched on her nose, glanced down at her lap, blinking rapidly as tears welled up in her eyes. Another man, younger and visibly nervous, scratched the back of his neck, clearly struggling to process the weight of what Keanu was saying. "You have power in this room," Keanu went on, his voice rising slightly but never losing its calm edge. "Not just over transactions, but over people's experiences. Every interaction you have shapes how someone feels when they leave this building. Are they walking out feeling respected and valued? Or are they leaving feeling like they don't matter?" He leaned back slightly, giving the group a moment to absorb his words. Then, after a brief pause, he added, "I'm not saying you have to be perfect. Nobody expects that. But you do have a responsibility to yourselves, to this bank, and most importantly, to the people who walk through those doors. If you can't handle that responsibility, then maybe this isn't the right place for you." The room fell silent again, the gravity of his message settling over everyone like a thick fog. For many of the employees, this was the first time they'd ever been confronted so directly about their behavior. Some felt defensive, others guilty, but all of them understood that what Keanu was saying wasn't just criticism, it was a call to action. After a few moments, Keanu stood up, brushing imaginary lint off his jeans. "All right," he said with a small smile, breaking the tension. "That's enough lecturing for one day. Let's focus on doing better moving forward. Deal?" The staff murmured their agreement, nodding eagerly, as though afraid to say anything else. Keanu gave them one last look, a mix of encouragement and expectation, before turning his attention back to Eleanor, who had remained seated nearby, watching the entire exchange with wide eyes. "Are you ready to go, Mrs. Eleanor?" he asked kindly, extending a hand to help her stand. She hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand in his, allowing him to guide her to her feet. "Yes, thank you," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've done so much for me today. More than I could ever repay." Keanu shook, his head dismissing her gratitude with a wave of his hand. "Don't mention it," he said warmly. "This is what we're supposed to do for each other. Take care of one another. Be kind." As they walked toward the exit together, the room erupted into spontaneous applause. Customers cheered, some even whistling, while the staff stood awkwardly, unsure whether to join in or remain silent. Outside, reporters who had caught wind of the commotion were already gathering, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward. But Keanu barely noticed. He was focused solely on making sure Eleanor got home safely. Before stepping out into the chaos, he turned back to the crowd inside the bank, offering a final piece of advice. "Remember," he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the noise, "kindness costs nothing, but it means everything." And with that, he disappeared through the glass doors, leaving behind a transformed atmosphere and a lesson that none of them would soon forget. By the time Keanu and Eleanor stepped out of the bank, the scene outside had transformed into something resembling a movie premiere. Reporters jostled for position, cameras flashed like strobe lights, and microphones were thrust forward as if they might magically reach Keanu's lips without him noticing. The crowd buzzed with excitement, fueled by the snippets of conversation that had leaked from inside the bank. Word traveled fast in small towns like this one, and within minutes social media timelines were flooded with posts about the Hollywood star who had walked into a local bank and stood up for an elderly woman. Keanu, ever composed, shielded Eleanor from the chaos as best he could. He gently guided her toward a quiet corner near the cafe next door, ensuring she was safely out of the spotlight before turning to face the reporters. His expression was calm but firm, his body language suggesting he was ready to address the situation, but on his own terms. All right, he said, raising a hand to quiet the growing commotion. "Let's take it easy, okay? No need for all this fuss." The reporters hesitated, their eagerness tempered slightly by his measured tone. One bold journalist pushed ahead anyway, shoving a microphone toward him. "Mr. Reeves, what happened inside the bank? Can you tell us why you intervened?" Keanu glanced briefly at Eleanor, who was watching nervously from the sidelines. She gave him a small nod, silently urging him to share the story if he thought it would help others understand. With a deep breath, Keanu turned back to the crowd, his voice steady and clear. "I didn't do anything special," he began, shrugging modestly. "I just saw someone being treated unfairly and decided to step in. That's all. Mrs. Eleanor here," he gestured toward her, his gesture protective, "came to the bank to handle a routine transaction, and instead of being helped, she was made to feel like a burden, like she didn't matter. And that's not right." His words resonated deeply not only with the reporters scribbling notes furiously, but also with the bystanders who had gathered to witness the spectacle. Several people nodded in agreement, murmuring softly among themselves. A young woman holding her phone aloft to record the moment whispered to her friend, "He's so humble. I can't believe he did that." Keanu continued, his tone thoughtful, but unwavering. "We live in a world where kindness often feels like it's in short supply. People are busy, stressed, distracted, and sometimes we forget that everyone deserves respect. It doesn't matter how old you are, what you look like, or whether you have everything figured out. We're all human, and we all deserve to be treated with dignity. The crowd listened intently, hanging onto every word. Even the reporters, usually eager to move on to the next headline, seemed captivated by the sincerity in his voice. For many of them, this wasn't just another celebrity appearance. It was a reminder of something far more important. As the interview wrapped up, Keanu made sure to highlight Eleanor's strength and resilience. "Mrs. Eleanor handled herself with incredible grace today," he said, smiling warmly at her. "She didn't ask for any of this attention, but I hope her story reminds us all to slow down and treat each other better, because moments like these, they stick with people." With that, he politely excused himself, gently ushering Eleanor away from the cameras and toward her car. As they walked, Eleanor couldn't help but marvel at the surreal turn her morning had taken. Just hours earlier, she had been dreading the trip to the bank, convinced she'd be met with frustration and humiliation. Now she was walking beside a man who had gone out of his way to restore her faith in humanity. "You didn't have to do any of this, you know," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "You've already done so much." Keanu chuckled, softly, shaking his head. "Of course I did," he replied. "People shouldn't have to face the world alone. Not when we can stand together." Back inside the bank, the aftermath of Keanu's visit continued to ripple through the staff. Mr. Harris, the manager, paced anxiously behind his desk, replaying the events of the morning over and over in his mind. He knew the lecture Keanu had given wasn't just meant for the employees. It was a direct challenge to him personally. The smugness he had worn like armor earlier now felt hollow, replaced by a gnawing sense of guilt. He called an emergency, meeting with the team, determined to address the issues head-on. "Listen," he began, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. "What happened today? It wasn't acceptable. None of us should ever make a customer feel the way Mrs. Eleanor did. We owe it to ourselves and to our community to do better." To his surprise, the staff responded positively. Many admitted they had grown complacent, treating customers as transactions rather than people. Others confessed they were afraid to speak up when they saw behavior they disagreed with. Together, they brainstormed ways to improve, from implementing mandatory training sessions on empathy and communication to creating a feedback system where customers could share their experiences anonymously. Word of the bank's efforts spread quickly throughout the town. Local news outlets praised Keanu for using his platform to advocate for kindness, while residents applauded the institution for taking swift action to address its shortcomings. Some even joked that the bank had become the nicest place in town overnight. As for Eleanor, she found herself at the center of newfound admiration. Neighbors stopped her on the street to thank her for inspiring change, while strangers sent letters and cards expressing gratitude for her courage. Though she never sought the spotlight, she embraced the role gracefully, using the opportunity to remind everyone that compassion starts with small, everyday actions. In the weeks that followed, the impact of Keanu's intervention became undeniable. The bank introduced new policies aimed at improving customer service, including extended hours for seniors and free workshops on navigating modern banking tools. Employees reported feeling more connected to their work, knowing they were making a difference in people's lives, and customers noticed the shift too, commenting on how much friendlier and more attentive the staff had become. Though Keanu returned to his busy life, his presence lingered in the hearts and minds of those he touched. For Eleanor, he remained a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in moments of despair there are still good people willing to stand up and make a difference. And for the community, his actions served as a powerful lesson. That kindness, no matter how small, has the power to create waves of change. It wasn't just a story about a celebrity stepping in to save the day. It was a story about humanity, connection, and the enduring belief that we're all capable of choosing kindness even when it's hard. The ripple effect of Keanu's intervention at the bank stretched far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. What started as a single act of kindness on an ordinary morning transformed not only the lives of those directly involved, but also the fabric of the entire community. Stories like Eleanor's tend to spread quickly in small towns where neighbors know each other by name and local gossip travels faster than wildfire. Within days, the tale of how Keanu Reeves had stepped in to defend dignity and demand respect became the talk of Maple Street, and eventually, much farther. Local news outlets picked up the story, running segments that highlighted both Keanu's heroics and the bank's subsequent efforts to improve its service. Reporters interviewed customers who had witnessed the event firsthand, many of whom recounted Keanu's calm demeanor and unwavering commitment to fairness. Clips from outside the bank showed him addressing the crowd with humility, emphasizing the importance of treating others with kindness. Social media exploded with posts praising his actions, with hashtags like "Be Like Keanu" and "Kindness Matters" trending across platforms. Memes circulated widely, depicting Keanu as a real-life superhero, a title he would no doubt laugh off if he saw it. But it wasn't just online chatter or glowing headlines that kept the story alive. The changes within the bank itself spoke volumes about the lasting impact of that day. Inspired by Keanu's words, Mr. Harris implemented sweeping reforms designed to foster empathy and accountability among his staff. Training sessions focused not just on technical skills, but also on emotional intelligence, how to listen actively, respond patiently, and recognize when someone might need extra care. Employees were encouraged to share their own experiences and challenges, creating a culture of openness and mutual support. One of the most significant changes came in the form of a new program called Neighborly Banking, aimed specifically at assisting elderly customers. Recognizing that many seniors struggled with modern banking systems, the initiative offered personalized guidance, extended hours for appointments, and even home visits for those unable to travel easily. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Older residents felt seen and valued again, while younger employees discovered a renewed sense of purpose in helping bridge generational gaps. For Eleanor, life after the incident took on a surprising new rhythm. Once a quiet, reserved woman content to stay out of the limelight, she suddenly found herself thrust into the role of a local celebrity. Neighbors stopped her at the grocery store to thank her for standing tall despite the humiliation she endured. Friends invited her to coffee mornings and book clubs, eager to hear more about her encounter with Keanu. Strangers sent heartfelt letters expressing admiration for her resilience and gratitude for shining a light on an issue they hadn't realized needed addressing. At first, Eleanor felt overwhelmed by the attention. She didn't see herself as brave or extraordinary. She had simply been trying to complete a routine task. But over time, she began to embrace her newfound visibility, using it as an opportunity to advocate for others. During interviews with reporters, she spoke candidly about the challenges faced by elderly individuals navigating a world that often overlooked them. "We're not asking for special treatment," she said during one particularly poignant segment. "We're asking to be treated with the same respect and patience we once gave to others." Her words resonated deeply, sparking conversations about ageism and accessibility in public spaces. Local businesses took note, implementing similar programs to better serve older patrons. Pharmacies introduced senior-only shopping hours. Libraries hosted technology workshops tailored to retirees. Even restaurants adjusted their menus to include larger print options for diners with vision impairments. Slowly but surely, the town evolved into a place where everyone felt welcome regardless of age or ability. Meanwhile, Keanu's involvement continued to inspire acts of kindness far beyond Maple Street. Fans around the world shared stories of their own encounters with him, recounting moments when his generosity or thoughtfulness had touched their lives. Some recalled meeting him at gas stations or coffee shops, where he'd paid for their meals without fanfare. Others spoke of chance, meetings on set or at charity events, describing him as genuine, humble, and endlessly kind. These anecdotes reinforced the idea that Keanu wasn't just playing heroes on screen. He embodied them in real life too. Back in the bank, employees often reflected on the lessons learned that day. Jake, the young teller who had initially snapped at Eleanor, underwent a profound transformation. Haunted by guilt but motivated by Keanu's advice, He threw himself into improving his interactions with customers. He began volunteering at a nearby retirement home, teaching seniors how to use smartphones and online banking tools. His efforts earned him recognition not only from his supervisors, but also from the residents themselves, who affectionately nicknamed him Tech Whisperer. Other staff members followed suit, finding creative ways to connect with customers. One teller started keeping a stash of chocolates behind the counter to hand out to children visiting with their parents. Another organized a monthly drawing contest for kids, offering small prizes to encourage creativity. These small gestures added up, turning routine transactions into memorable experiences. By prioritizing human connection over efficiency, the bank became more than just a financial institution. It became a cornerstone of the community. As weeks turned into months, the memory of Keanu's visit lingered like a warm glow. Though he never returned to the bank, his presence remained palpable in every interaction, every policy change, and every smile exchanged between staff and customers. For Eleanor, the experience served as a reminder that even in moments of despair, there is always hope. And for the rest of the town, it underscored a timeless truth. That kindness, no matter how seemingly insignificant, has the power to create ripples of change that extend far beyond what we can imagine. In the end, the story wasn't just about Keanu Reeves or Eleanor Thompson, or even the bank itself. It was about the collective effort of ordinary people choosing to do better, to be better. It was about recognizing our shared humanity and acting on it, whether through grand gestures or simple acts of compassion. Because in a world that often feels divided, moments like these remind us of what truly matters: connection, understanding, and the enduring belief that we're all capable of making a difference. One kind word, one thoughtful action, at a time.